My child. Stop for a moment before you let this message pass you by. There is a reason you are hearing these words at this particular moment. There is something hidden beneath the silence, something that has been unfolding where your eyes could not see it and your ears could not hear it. While you were trying to move forward, someone else was standing still. While you were convincing yourself that the story had ended, someone else was quietly returning to the beginning. And tonight, I want you to listen carefully, because this is not a story about what you wish would happen. It is a fictional spiritual message created for entertainment, inspiration, and emotional reflection. But within this story, imagine heaven pulling back the curtain for just a moment. Imagine the world becoming completely silent. Imagine the clocks moving past midnight. Imagine a room somewhere far away from you, dark except for the faint light of a phone screen. And imagine someone lying awake at 3 a.m., staring at your name. They had told themselves they were over you. They had repeated it so many times that they almost believed it. I'm fine. It's better this way. I've moved on. I don't care anymore. But at 3 a.m., when there was no one around to impress, no conversation to hide behind, no noise to distract them, those words became difficult to believe. Because your absence suddenly felt louder than your presence ever had. They reached for their phone. They unlocked it. They opened the conversation. And there you were. Your name. Your picture. Your old messages. The memories they had tried to bury. And something inside them broke open. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like a door that had been locked for months suddenly opening by itself. They stared at the last conversation. They read the words again. Then again. And somewhere between one message and another, they realized something they had been desperately avoiding. They still love you. My beloved child, do not rush past that moment. Because the most important part is not that they remembered you. The most important part is what happened inside them when they did. They remembered the way you cared when they did not know how to receive it. They remembered the patience you gave them when they were distant. They remembered conversations that seemed ordinary at the time but now feel priceless. They remembered your voice. Your laugh. The way you looked at them when you thought they were not paying attention. They remembered the little things. And suddenly, the little things became enormous. A sentence. A song. A place. A date. A photograph. A notification. A familiar name. Something completely ordinary became the doorway to everything they had been trying not to feel. And they asked themselves the question they had been avoiding for so long. What if I never stopped loving them? The room remained silent. The phone remained in their hand. But inside their heart, everything was moving. They remembered why they walked away. They remembered the mistakes. The misunderstandings. The pride. The fear. The things left unsaid. The moments when they could have chosen honesty but chose silence instead. And perhaps, most painfully, they remembered the moment they realized you were no longer chasing them. That moment frightened them more than they admitted. Because as long as you were reaching out, they could tell themselves that you would always be there. As long as you cared loudly, they did not have to confront how deeply they cared quietly. But when your silence arrived, something changed. Your absence became a mirror. And they were forced to look at themselves. At 3 a.m., there was nowhere to hide. No friends. No distractions. No busy schedule. No carefully constructed explanation. Just them. Their thoughts. And your name glowing on a screen. They scrolled upward. They went further back. They found messages they had forgotten. They saw moments they once considered insignificant. And suddenly, those moments felt sacred. They paused at one particular message. Their fingers stopped moving. Their eyes stayed on the screen. And for several seconds, they did nothing. Then they whispered something into the darkness. "I miss them." It was the first honest sentence they had spoken about you in a long time. And once they said it, they could not take it back. Because sometimes the heart waits until the world becomes quiet before telling the truth. During the day, people can run from themselves. At night, the heart becomes harder to silence. And at 3 a.m., the memories they had buried began knocking again. Not because heaven was forcing them to return. Not because some magical promise guaranteed what would happen next. But because the story inside this fictional message had reached the moment when avoidance could no longer survive. They had spent so much time trying to convince themselves that losing you was necessary. Now they were beginning to wonder whether losing you was the greatest mistake they had ever made. My child, listen closely. There is something powerful about realizing the value of something after you thought you had permanently lost it. Sometimes people only understand the warmth of a presence after living through its absence. Sometimes they only understand the safety of a heart after discovering how cold the world can feel without it. And sometimes a person does not realize how deeply they loved someone until they finally stop expecting that person to come back. That was happening now. They had expected you to remain emotionally available. They had expected your heart to wait. They had expected the door to remain open. But something in you had changed. You were not the same person they remembered. You had cried. You had questioned everything. You had replayed conversations. You had wondered what you did wrong. You had stared at your own phone waiting for a message that never came. You had asked yourself whether they ever truly cared. And eventually, you began learning how to live without an answer. That was the part they never expected. They expected your love to remain exactly where they left it. But love does not always remain untouched. Sometimes it becomes quieter. Sometimes it becomes wiser. Sometimes it stops begging. And when they sensed that change in you, fear entered their heart. Not fear of you. Fear of losing the possibility of you. There is a difference. They could tolerate your distance when they believed you would eventually return. They could tolerate silence when they believed they still had time. But suddenly, they wondered if time had already moved beyond their control. Their thumb hovered over the message box. They typed something. Deleted it. Typed again. Deleted it. They wrote, "Hey." They stared at it. Deleted it. They wrote, "I was thinking about you." Deleted it. They wrote, "Are you awake?" Deleted that too. Then they placed the phone beside them. They closed their eyes. And almost immediately, they picked it up again. Because the heart does not become peaceful simply because the mind commands it to be. They were fighting themselves. One part wanted to reach for you. Another part was terrified of what your response might reveal. What if you ignored them? What if you had moved on? What if you answered coldly? What if you told them you no longer felt anything? That possibility hurt more than they expected. Because deep down, they had been protecting themselves with one dangerous assumption. They thought you would always love them. Now they were not sure. And uncertainty has a strange way of exposing feelings that certainty allowed people to hide. They looked at your name again. Then something happened. They opened a photograph. Perhaps it was one they had not looked at in months. Maybe you were smiling. Maybe it was an ordinary picture. Nothing dramatic. Nothing extraordinary. But they stared at your face longer than they intended. And their expression changed. Because they remembered the person behind the photograph. They remembered how you made them feel when life was heavy. They remembered the conversations that lasted longer than planned. They remembered how you could notice when something was wrong even when they said nothing. They remembered the moments when you believed in them during times when they did not believe in themselves. And suddenly, regret arrived. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that asks questions. Why did I push them away? Why did I act like I didn't care? Why did I let pride become more important than love? Why did I wait? And the hardest question came last. What if they are finally gone? My beloved child, this is where the story becomes deeper. Because they did not only miss you. They missed the version of themselves that existed around you. The version that laughed more freely. The version that dreamed more boldly. The version that believed love could actually be safe. You were connected in their memory to a part of themselves they had lost, and that is why forgetting you became impossible. They could meet other people. They could have conversations. They could smile. They could appear completely normal, but there was a quiet space inside them that no one else seemed to reach. They did not know what to call it. They only knew that when the world became silent, that space began whispering your name. At 3 a.m., the whisper became impossible to ignore. They sat up. They looked around the room, everything was still. And for the first time in a long time, they allowed themselves to feel everything. The love. The regret. The longing. The confusion. The fear. The hope. All of it, they stopped fighting. And tears came. Not because they were weak. Because some emotions become heavier when they are held for too long. They wiped their face quickly, almost embarrassed even though nobody was watching. Then they laughed softly at themselves. How did I get here? But the answer was already inside their heart. They never stopped caring. They simply became very good at hiding it. They had confused distance with healing. They had confused silence with peace. They had confused distraction with moving on. And now the truth was standing in front of them. They still loved you. But here is where you must listen carefully, because love alone does not erase mistakes. Love does not automatically repair broken trust. Love does not excuse poor choices. Love does not guarantee reconciliation. And this fictional story is not telling you to stop living your life and wait for someone. No. The deeper message is about awakening. About recognizing what the heart refused to recognize before. About the moment a person finally understands that some connections cannot simply be dismissed because they became inconvenient. They can be ignored. They can be denied. They can be buried. But memories have a way of returning when the noise disappears. And that night, their memories returned one by one. They remembered your kindness. They remembered your patience. They remembered your eyes. They remembered the last time you spoke. And then they remembered something even more painful. The moment they hurt you. They remembered your silence afterward. They remembered the look on your face. They remembered how you tried to act strong. They remembered the distance that followed. And suddenly, they understood something they had failed to understand back then. You were not asking for perfection. You were asking for honesty. You were asking to be valued. You were asking to know where you stood. And instead of answering, they ran. Perhaps they were afraid of vulnerability. Perhaps they were carrying wounds you knew nothing about. Perhaps they were confused. Perhaps they simply did not understand what they had. But none of those explanations erased the consequence. You were hurt. And now they were beginning to feel the weight of it. They opened the chat again. They read the final message. Their eyes stayed there. And their mind began imagining a conversation that had never happened. They imagined telling you everything. I was scared. I didn't know how to handle what I felt. I thought I needed distance. I thought I would get over you. I was wrong. They imagined your reaction. Would you forgive them? Would you listen? Would you believe them? Would you tell them that the person they once knew was gone? Their heart tightened. Because there was something they could not control anymore. Your choice. They could finally understand that loving someone does not give you ownership over their heart. You could choose differently. You could say no. You could protect yourself. And that realization made their feelings even more serious. Because for the first time, they were not thinking about how to get you back. They were thinking about whether they had become worthy of another chance. That is a different question. And it requires a different kind of courage. The clock moved. 3:07 a.m. Then 3:12. Then 3:19. Time kept moving while they remained in the same place. They placed the phone against their chest. They closed their eyes. And quietly, almost like a prayer, they said your name. Not because they expected a miracle. Not because they knew what tomorrow would bring. But because your name still carried something inside them. Something unfinished. Something unresolved. Something alive. My beloved child, sometimes the most powerful moment in a story is not when someone returns. It is when they finally become honest about why they left. And that honesty had begun. But there was another layer. One they had not yet discovered. Because while they were sitting in that darkness, remembering you, they suddenly remembered a promise. A promise they had once made. Maybe they said it casually. Maybe they said it during a beautiful moment. Maybe they promised they would never let you feel alone. Maybe they promised they would always be there. Whatever the words were, they remembered them. And the memory hit harder than everything else. Because now they understood that the person they had promised something to was the person they had abandoned emotionally. They covered their face with their hands. For a few moments, they simply sat there. No message. No explanation. No excuse. Just realization. And realization can be painful because it removes the comfort of pretending you did nothing wrong. They finally saw the situation from your side. They imagined waiting. They imagined wondering. They imagined checking the phone. They imagined trying to understand silence. And suddenly, they understood why you had eventually stopped reaching out. You were not trying to punish them. You were trying to survive the uncertainty. That realization changed something. The desire to send a careless "hey" disappeared. They did not want to send something meaningless anymore. If they reached out, they wanted to tell the truth. But truth requires courage. And courage is exactly what they had been avoiding. They began typing. Slowly. One sentence. Then another. Their hands trembled slightly. They stopped. Read it. Deleted it. Started again. This time, they did not write, "I miss you." They wrote something deeper. "I'm sorry." They stared at those words. Then another sentence appeared. "I should have told you how I felt." They paused. Their eyes filled again. Another sentence. I thought I could move on without you. Another pause. Then the sentence that frightened them most. But I never did. Their thumb hovered above the screen. They could send it. One touch. One moment. One decision. But they did not. Not yet. Because suddenly, another thought entered their mind. What if they are sleeping? They almost smiled. Even after everything, they were still thinking about your peace. They placed the phone down. But the message remained unsent. And that unsent message became the symbol of everything between you. Feelings that existed but were never spoken. Apologies that were delayed. Questions that were never answered. Love that was hidden behind pride. And two people separated not necessarily because the feeling disappeared, but because the courage to face the feeling arrived too late. My beloved child, do not mistake this story for a command to chase someone. Your life is not supposed to stop because another person's heart is confused. Your worth does not depend on whether someone realizes it. Your future should never be placed on hold for a person who has not yet learned how to communicate. You are allowed to keep walking. You are allowed to heal. You are allowed to become someone who no longer begs for clarity. And perhaps that is exactly what made them finally see you differently. You stopped begging. You stopped explaining. You stopped trying to convince them of your value. You became quiet. And in that quiet, they finally heard what your presence had been saying all along. I deserve to be chosen. That realization was not comfortable for them. It forced them to confront the possibility that you might become the person who got away. Not because you were an object to possess, but because they had failed to recognize what they had while it was still close. They looked at the time. 3:33 a.m. For a moment, they simply stared at the numbers. They wondered if they should call. Their heart said yes. Their fear said no. They opened your contact. Their finger moved toward the call button. Stopped. Moved away. Then back again. They imagined hearing your voice. What would they say? Hi. Too ordinary. I miss you. Too small. I still love you. Too vulnerable. I'm sorry. Not enough. They realized there was no single sentence that could repair everything. Maybe that was why they had been silent. They were searching for perfect words. But love does not always need perfect words. Sometimes it needs honest ones. Still, they hesitated. And then they saw something. A memory. A photograph. A tiny reminder from a time when the two of you were happy. They smiled through their tears. For several seconds, the room felt different. Warm. Almost peaceful. And they whispered. I wish I had known then what I know now. The words disappeared into the darkness. But inside them, something had shifted. They were no longer trying to convince themselves that they did not love you. They were finally asking what they were going to do about it. That question would follow them into morning. It would follow them when the sun came up. It would follow them while they drank their coffee. While they answered messages. While they spoke to other people. While they pretended everything was normal. Because once the heart tells the truth at 3 a.m., it becomes difficult to lie to yourself at 10 a.m. They could try. They probably would. But something had changed. And you may not know it yet. That is what makes this moment so powerful. You were sleeping, healing, or simply living your life. Meanwhile, somewhere in the fictional story unfolding tonight, another heart had finally stopped running from itself. And the next realization was even deeper. They realized they did not only want you back. They wanted to become someone who could love you correctly. That thought frightened them. Because becoming different requires work. It requires humility. It requires confronting old patterns. It requires admitting that saying, "I love you," is meaningless if your actions continually make someone feel unwanted. They knew that. And for the first time, they were not romanticizing the past. They were examining it.